There's a law in California that allows 12-year-olds to leave their family home if their parents aren't gender affirming. And these kids can go live in a residential facility where they can become a dependent of the state.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken. Hey, everybody, happy Friday. Before we dive in, Stephanie, I don't know if you can hear the birds in the background.
No,
No? Okay, good.
I don't know if
There's
you can
these
hear my kids in the background, but there's all kinds of noise at my
No,
house.
I can't hear your kids, but I have this like new flock of birds that just moved into my neighborhood like 2 days ago, kept me up all night squawking, and they're incredibly loud. So if you do hear it, I'm sorry. But anyway, so last week we talked about how the Biden admin basically is destroying Title IX with the trans agenda. And now, what, less than a week later, Biden has issued a new regulation as part of the Affordable Care Act called Non-Discrimination in Health Programs and Activities. And this is prohibiting discrimination on the basis of a protected class and providing health services. Now, that sounds great, right? Until we get to the part where the Department of Health and Human Services has changed the definition of sex under Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act to include gender identity. Just like with Title IX. And also, just like the changes to Title IX, the Biden admin has made this ruling as an executive order without a vote from Congress. And of course, this is being promoted by Biden as a win for the country towards like a more equitable and inclusive healthcare system because it will include transgender healthcare. So what this means when this bill goes into effect is that transgender surgeries and procedures will be added to the list of services that healthcare providers must offer. And this is despite repeated requests by the medical community to include an explicit conscience objection. So reportedly, now any hospital or doctor that is found to have engaged in discrimination against performing any kind of transgender surgeries or care will forfeit access to federal funding, including Medicare and Medicaid. And basically, the Department of Health and Human Services is going to be able to force doctors and hospitals that may have like personal or religious objections to transgender procedures. And there's a lot of hospitals, like Catholic hospitals, that don't want to do these things, but they're going to have to perform these procedures or face legal liability, which, by the way, is in violation of the First Amendment and federal legislation conscious protections for doctors. But the government forced it with COVID, so why not with transgender surgeries, right? So, as explained by Terry Schilling, the president of the American Principles Project, in a recent Washington Examiner article, he said, quote, healthcare providers will be forced to provide sex-changing drugs and surgeries to all comers, including minors, or be forced out of business. Insurers will be compelled to cover these practices. Individual doctors, nurses, and other practitioners will be pressured to facilitate sex changes or else risk career-ending lawsuits, even if it goes against their conscience and best medical judgment, end quote. And the Biden admin is saying, no, this isn't going to happen. And allegedly, they're going to allow medical providers to apply for a religious freedom and conscience exemption where they can receive a temporary exemption while the Office of Civil Rights decides on their application. But this ruling is also going to be the first time that the Department of Health and Human Services will consider Medicare Part B payment as a form of federal financial assistance in order to trigger civil rights laws. So it's clear that hospitals and doctors who don't agree with this ruling will either have to comply or risk losing their job.
Okay, so many things come to mind as you're going through all that. Number one, what happened to the Hippocratic Oath where doctors take an oath saying they're going to do no harm? Number two, like this is exactly what we've been saying with this whole trans agenda where they are trying to erase women. And here, like they are literally doing that with Title IX and now with this, where they are changing the definition of
Yeah.
sex. Like they are erasing women just like every civilization in history has done over and over again. And we're just sitting by and letting this happen. Like it's absolutely insane. And the other point that I want to make is think about the Affordable Care Act when they mandated that insurance companies would have to pay for birth control. and think about how much our premiums went up as a
Went up.
result.
Yep.
So just imagine hormone therapy and surgery. I mean, we're talking about what did we say? It was like between 1 and $2 million like a year or like something outrageous per patient. It's very expensive, way more expensive than birth control. And so if they're going to mandate this, we can expect our premiums to go up
To go
again
up.
because they doubled
Yep.
last time. What are they going to do now? Triple, quadruple? Um, but of course, I'm not surprised by any of this because we are living in the Biden administration world of craziness. And we've already been seeing this with psychologists and pediatricians, where the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Psychology Association, which I've lost all respect for, have completely changed their protocol where they were dealing with a mental diagnosis of gender or body dysphoria, and now they're affirming it. I mean, there is no diagnosis, no mental health support. They are just affirming it and moving forward right to hormone blockers. And if psychologists and pediatricians don't comply, they risk losing their license. So now what the Biden administration is doing is just adding that element of enforcement by threatening to remove their funding. And at the end of the day, even these nonprofit healthcare systems, they are all still focused on money. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're still focused on profit, even if they say they're nonprofit. And it makes me so mad because they're preying on innocent children and parents, like parents that are worried about their kids. So they seek professional help and they're completely taken advantage of and sold this lie that if they don't medically transition their child, that the child will commit suicide. And they aren't told any of the lifelong medical issues or the costs that are going to follow. And I just hope that every family that is dealing with this sues the doctors, the healthcare system, and the Biden administration because they're all complicit in this. And everyone that's listening needs to go and search Chloe Cole and hear her story about what happened. And then also search detransition awareness on social media. And you will see tons of firsthand experiences of people who went through this and are now regretting it and dealing with lifelong consequences. And it's also a great thing to share with people that are like for the trans agenda, thinking that they're helping kids, because when you see the other side of it, it's really eye opening. And I don't know how anyone could be for it after seeing these detransitioners.
Yeah, and what's crazy is like we have the Biden admin like pushing as hard as possible to promote this gender transition while we've got other countries that are realizing how fucked up it is. There have been several international studies showing what we already know, that this shit is doing more harm than good. And the Washington Times reported that the CAS review, it was a landmark 4-year study in the UK about gender medicine. And the results were released earlier this month, and it found, quote, remarkably weak evidence, end quote, to support gender transition drugs and surgery for minors. And the author of this study, her name is Hilary Cass, and she's the former president of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health. And she summarized her report in the British Medical Journal last month. And I was reading an article in Just the News where Cass stated that she believes, quote, the rationale for early puberty suppression remains unclear, and medical pathway will not be the best way for most gender confused children to manage their gender related distress. Clinicians should practice extreme caution with requests for masculinizing or feminizing hormones for minors. Some young adults told us they wish they had known when they were younger that there are many more ways of being trans than following a binary medical transgender pathway, end quote. And like the UK is backtracking on everything. The National Health Service in England just banned puberty blockers last month for gender transition. In fact, they are closing their only gender identity clinic for kids because they determined that the risks outweigh the benefits. I was reading in the Telegraph that they're also changing their National Health Service constitution to go back and redefine sex as biological And they're doing this to prohibit men who identify as women from being admitted to female only wards and trying to let female patients request intimate care from another woman when reasonably possible. And the UK government also released guidance for schools in England urging them not to socially transition children with gender confusion and to consult parents by default when children request transition, which is the exact opposite of what they're doing in the United States. And then you've got Finland, Norway, and Sweden that have all placed limits on treatment for minors under 18 years old. And it's like, wow, Stephanie, you look at all these other countries that were promoting this agenda that have realized how fucking damaging it is. Meanwhile, the United States is like full steam ahead, knowing all of this shit.
Right. Like you would think that our government would look to Europe for data since they started this gender transition stuff way before us. I
Yep.
want to say 10 years ago, it may have even been closer to 15 or 20 years at this point. But the point is, they have long term data that we don't have here in the United States. But instead of looking to that for guidance, they are actively choosing to ignore it. And
Mhm.
that's what makes me so mad when it comes to this topic. And again, like we always say, follow the money. I would bet anything that these politicians that are for this whole trans agenda are getting a piece of the pie from these healthcare systems that are raking in billions of dollars off of these transitions. And that's
Oh,
why they're pushing it. That's all they care about.
yeah, undoubtedly. And like, let's take a look at what's happening at the state level. We already have 22 states that have banned gender affirming surgery for minors and teenagers. But on Monday, the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals issued a ruling requiring that state health insurance plans have to pay for gender transition surgeries. And meanwhile, we now have over 15 GOP state attorney generals who are suing the Biden admin over the gender identity changes to Title IX. And again, this has only been a week. And I was reading in Just the News, there's 4 separate lawsuits that were filed on the same day in separate jurisdictions overseen by 3 U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeal. And these are all against the Department of Education. One lawsuit is being led by Kentucky and Tennessee, along with Ohio, Indiana, Virginia, and West Virginia. And they're all claiming that the U.S. Department of Education has no authority to let boys into girls' locker rooms, and it undermines protections of privacy and safety for women in private spaces. There's a lawsuit filed jointly by Montana, Idaho, and Mississippi with similar claims. And then other lawsuits filed by Alabama, Texas, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana. And the lawsuit being led by Alabama is also joined by private groups like Parents Defending Education, the Independent Women's Forum, and Speech First. And then there's a group called America's First Legal, which is led by former Trump White House aide Stephen Miller. And this group's included in the lawsuit being led by Texas. And I don't know what's going on in Florida, Stephanie, but I know Governor Abbott said on Monday that public universities in Texas will not be complying, even if these changes are upheld in court.
Yeah, I know DeSantis is doing a lot of the similar things in Florida, which again, I cannot tell you how many times over the past 2 years I have been so happy to live in Florida and not in one of these blue states. But what makes me so mad, again, like this episode just has me like so heated because with the whole Title IX thing, I don't hear any of these liberal, like feminists talking about it. They'll go to these like trans rights rallies and everything else. They're saying nothing about Title IX. And the whole purpose of Title IX was to protect women, to give women equal opportunity as men. So letting a biological male be a part of that defeats the entire process to begin with. Like you might as well just scrap the whole thing because it doesn't matter anymore. Yet no one is talking about it. Like, where are the women's rights groups and activists? They're not talking about it because it goes
Yeah.
against their agenda. So that shows you how much they really care.
Yeah, and you just brought up blue states. So I want to mention a story from communist California because we already know that this is one of the most vile states when it comes to pushing the trans agenda. And I was listening to Megyn Kelly's podcast earlier this week, and she was interviewing this woman named Erin Friday. And she was a previously very liberal mom who was also a lawyer in California. And her daughter was being brainwashed with this radical transgender ideology starting in middle school. And the school changed her daughter's pronouns without her knowing it. And this, what I guess, was during COVID. So she calls the school to read them the riot act. And mind you, her kids being like schooled at home through the internet, like every kid during COVID in these blue cities. And the school told her that she needed to provide a safe place, and they called Child Protective Services on Erin and said she was creating an unsafe environment by not affirming her daughter's gender ideology. And the police show up at her house because the school said that by not affirming her daughter's chosen gender and pronouns, her daughter was going to commit suicide if they didn't socially transition her. So I want to play a clip from the show because I feel like we talk a lot about how the schools are pushing gender fluidity and the trans agenda, and we've focused a lot on transgender boys and like how this is destroying female sports and the predatory nature of, males going into female bathrooms and shit like that. And we've also talked a lot, not recently, but in past episodes, we've gone into detail about the very graphic and horrific, irreversible physical effects of minors taking cross-sex hormone treatment. But we haven't talked a lot about what's happening to females from the perspective of pushing this idea of social transitioning and the huge impact that it's having on young girls. And when I heard this clip, I didn't realize a lot of this shit was going on. So I'm going to guess some of our listeners don't either.
Saw something happen in your daughter's Girl Scout troop.
That's right. About half of the Girl Scout troop came out as trans or something on the LGBTQ spectrum. And that was very typical because these kids are given this whole list of different identities that they can jump into. And it's intriguing, especially when they're learning that being a white middle class girl with two parents that are together and own a car are now oppressors. The way that they can jump in and become a victim is to glom on to some LGBTQ plus identity, and that then gives them some status. So it's definitely a social contagion. We know that social contagions traditionally start with adolescent girls, bulimia, anorexia, cutting, the feigning. We know this, and this is no different, except that we're medicalizing these children and we're concretizing their beliefs.
Yeah, and causing what Abigail Schreier accurately termed irreversible damage to them, whether it's losing our sex organs or creating infertility in a perfectly healthy child or the inability to have a normal sex life. I mean, all of this to minors who can't possibly consent to it. One of the many reasons you're now fighting back in the bluest of blue states. Um, you mentioned groomers on the internet. I think that's of interest to our audience. So how does that happen? Especially because you seem like an attentive, loving, involved parent. So I think attentive, loving, involved parents think this can't happen to them.
Well, that's the tragedy, and that's where I fall on the sword. I thought I was an on top of it parent. I looked at my daughter's phone. I monitored her social media, but these kids are smarter than us, and she created all these fake accounts that I watched, and then she had these other accounts that I was unaware of through Discord, even Pinterest. These kids can DM each other. They get in touch with each other on Google Live Docs. And these older kids, like there's 16, 17-year-old girls who say that they're non-binary or trans, are teaching the 12 and 13-year-old girls. And so there's this grooming going on among these young kids themselves. And then there are the adults that hop in. So I was able to look at things on my daughter's Instagram that would, curl your toes. It was so foul. Older men telling her to send naked pictures of her because it's not her body after all. She's going to have a male body in the future. So this is the predatory aspect of the trans movement.
And she goes on, like, you guys need to go and listen to this entire interview because it's pretty intense. And she talks about all the steps she had to take to basically save her daughter. And it has to do with how, like, the social brainwashing has gotten to the point where girls don't want to be women. They want to pause puberty and not experience womanhood because they've been so conditioned to look at the female body as sexualized, and they don't want to experience the distress of becoming women. They don't want to have a period every month. So doctors are giving these young girls like period suppression medication, and it's all just being normalized. And having kids remain gender neutral is being like fetishized, and it's all just so fucking disturbing, and it's straight predator shit.
Yeah, this is like a red flag for any predator to, you know, attach themselves to this community. It's just beyond disturbing. And it made me think, like, when I got my period, I was like the first out of all my friends. I was really young. And I remember to this day, I was crying. Like, I was bawling my eyes out. And I was like telling my mom, like, I don't want it, make it go away. I don't want it. And my mom was crying, like, she was devastated because I was so devastated. And like, imagine if that happened today. Like, I probably would have been put on puberty blockers. And I'm just like, thank God it was the 90s and this shit wasn't a thing yet. But I mean, shit, I've got 3 kids, and this is terrifying because it's showing, even if you're a parent that knows better, they can still like go against your rights as a parent and corrupt your kid. It's insane.
Yeah, and they're encouraging your kids that if your parents don't agree with you, come to us and we'll take care of it, which is even scarier. And then I want to play another clip from a different interview because I guess Megyn Kelly is on like a trans topic this week, because she did another interview that came out yesterday with this woman named Mary Margaret Olahan. And she just wrote a book called Detrans, and I think it's coming out next week. But I want to play a clip from the show as well, because as you mentioned earlier, Stephanie, one of the detransitioners she interviews in the book is Chloe Cole. And this clip explains a lot about why these young girls are wanting to turn trans, and the social transitioning aspect of this agenda is just so fucking sick. So listen to this one.
All the time. And something that I wanted to bring up in relation to that very topic is because I found this really fascinating. Chloe and I kind of deep dived into her reasons for being interested in transgender ideology in the first place. And something that I think a lot of us in the political world don't have a good grasp on, but I'm sure you do, Megan, as a woman, is the effect that Instagram has on girls and their perceptions of womanhood and femininity. So Chloe was telling me she was like 13 when she got on Instagram for the first time. And she's seeing all these depictions of womanhood, these like very sexy, voluptuous, sensual women who have millions of men in their following. And they get so much male affirmation for the basically soft porn photos that they post of themselves all day. And so she's seeing these representations of womanhood and thinking, I don't think I can be that. That's very daunting. I don't know how to do that. I don't look like that. And then at the same time, as a little girl on the internet, she's being exposed to pornography, which is something that many of the detransitioners I talked to said they were exposed to at a young age. And so in the pornography, we know that women are degraded and humiliated and treated in a really horrible fashion. So she's seeing, on the one hand, the women treated horribly in these scenarios, and on the other hand, these like really aggressively sexual depictions of women on social media. And she's thinking, A, I don't want that, the depictions in pornography. One girl told me that doesn't look fun, looks fun for the guys, not for the girls. And B, I don't think I can ever achieve that. I can't be that sexy. I don't know how to do it. And so when you have that combined with these ideologists saying, oh, you don't feel like you fit in, you feel lonely, you don't really like hanging out with girls, obviously you're a boy, you're trans. That's just, it's too easy. It's too simple.
They say, if you think you're trans, you're trans. That's it.
Exactly.
You have the
exactly.
You
And all the memes, they all say, if you think you're trans, you're trans. Or, all the affirmations. If your parents aren't affirming you, they hate you. If your friends aren't affirming you, they hate you. Be with people who love you. All of that on social media, it's like catnip for a lonely person, for
All of
someone that
whom,
doesn't fit in.
all of whom, Mary Margaret, will abandon them as soon as they have second thoughts. As
Right.
soon as like Chloe was like, I don't know if it's a big middle finger, F off. You were never really trans. You're out of our club, our cult, as you accurately call it.
Yes. No, and it really is a cult because, like you were saying, there's this love bombing and this insistent determination to bring everyone, as many people as possible, into the fold. And then when these people desist or the detransitioners dare to say, actually, I had a really horrible experience here and I'm suffering mentally and physically and I need help, those people are told that they are gaslighters, that they are betrayers, that they obviously never were part of the trans community, and they're just thrown out. And the saddest part is they're thrown out and they don't really have anywhere to go. The doctors today are such cowards that they are not willing to put their reputations on the line and help people like Prisha and Chloe.
Like, this is just disturbing to me.
It's like the typical Democrat Party, right? They like you until you disagree with them, and then they will
Yeah.
ruin your life.
Yeah. And so, like, I'm playing this, especially that first clip from the mom in California, because for our listeners who live in California, like my mom, if you don't already know this, there's a law in California that allows 12-year-olds to leave their family home if their parents aren't gender affirming. And these kids can go live in a residential facility where they can become a dependent of the state. And at the age of 12, that child can then dictate their own medical treatments, including gender affirming care. And this is how they're getting around the idea of parental consent. Because if you're a dependent of the state, you no longer need parental consent. So, Erin, this woman has a ballot initiative. It's at protectkidsca.com. And if you live in California or you're registered to vote in California, you can go and sign this petition before May 15th to get a measure on the ballot, so that the components of the measure are defining the words male and female in biological terms, preventing gender affirming surgeries and treatment on children under 18, and preventing schools from socially transitioning kids by giving them these like transgender tools and helping them change their gender behind their parents' backs. And I think this is going to be tough because California is a trans sanctuary state where children from any other state can flee to California and be protected, quote, protected, and transitioned without their parents' consent. And the same thing goes for doctors. If there's a doctor who can't perform these gender affirming surgeries in rational states that prohibit these kinds of crimes, they can flee to California and conduct the surgeries there. I mean, it's just fucking insane. But she has to get 546,000 signatures to get this measure put on the ballot. So again, I'm just bringing this up because if you're a parent in California, or you know a parent in California, or you just live in California and you know this shit is fucking wrong, like, go to the website and sign the petition.
I'd be terrified to live in California at this point. Like this,
Yeah.
this is so messed up. And I don't know how this is not considered child abuse. You know, it's putting children, 12-year-old children in danger. And again, it seems like the perfect place for pedophiles to flock and take advantage of these kids when they're removed from their parents and they have no one to tell. And it just seems like the government is doing everything they can to chip away at parental rights. And just think about it, like 12 years old, it's such a volatile time for kids. They're going through puberty. They're, in middle school where bullying is relentless. Kids start rebelling against their parents. Like, think about how many times when you were that age, you were like, I can't wait till I'm 18 and I can move out. And
Yeah.
now they freaking can,
Yeah.
And it's like our government is using this. They're preying on these kids, knowing that they're going to be able to rip them away from their parents at a time where they're just going through the normal process of growing up. And it's sick and it's twisted and it's terrifying.
And I guess maybe I'm naive because, when we were kids, we didn't have easy access to the internet like this. And I didn't know kids were exposed to that much porn, because one of the things I was hearing on that podcast was, I guess, the average age that kids get exposed to porn now is 10 years old, which
I didn't know
is
that either,
crazy.
because obviously I'm on social media, all the platforms, all the time, and I never see it.
Yeah.
But that just goes to show, like, they're targeting young girls. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And it's awful.
Yeah, and this is such heavy topic, but I feel like it's so fucking important for us to talk about this. But I want to transition slightly to something humorous, still completely ridiculous. But Stephanie, there was this asinine article that I read in the Daily Caller yesterday. And apparently there is like a new gender identity that's been added to the LGBTQIA XYZ 123 plus minus whatever list of bullshit made up gender terms. And it's called gender season. So I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's this social media influencer named Dee Whitnell, and she explains that gender season is a micro identity that is used to describe when a person feels like their gender changes with the seasons. So I want to play this ridiculous clip from her TikTok.
Did you know, however, there is a gender identity that is linked to the seasons? This is called gender season. And this is a gender identity I've only just learned about. It's a micro identity. It's not an identity that I have ever heard discussed before. It's a new one for me. Gender season is an individual who explores their gender identity in relation to a season or all the seasons. So this might be somebody whose gender expression and identity is linked to one season. So for example, winter. Or this might be somebody whose gender identity and expression changes depending on the season.
I'm sorry, what? And she then goes on, she has a video on YouTube too, and she goes on to say that, like, for her, she feels more masculine in the summertime. So she'll wear masculine clothes like shorts, and she keeps her hair up more often because that makes her feel like a boy. But then in winter, her girl mode comes out, and she loves wearing skirts and dresses and having her hair down. Like, where is the gender identity in that?
Right. Why do we even have gender then at that point? Like, that's what I mean with the Title IX thing. Like, why even have it if gender is this spectrum or whatever? I mean, I'm speechless. And it's like hard to believe that there's actually people out there like this. But guess what, Dee? Wearing your hair in a ponytail and putting a skirt on doesn't make you a woman. And wearing masculine clothing doesn't make you a man. I mean, implying that it's not only asinine, but it's offensive, like they are making a mockery of it. And I went and I stalked this girl's TikTok because I couldn't believe that there's actually, like, I thought this has got to be satire. No, like, this is real. And she has a pinned post at the top of her TikTok where she's holding a sign that says, quote, "I don't want to attend another trans kid's funeral." And so people are commenting and they're like, yeah, maybe you should help them get some help with their mental illness instead of telling them to change everything about them and take these dangerous hormones and surgery. Like, hello, wake up, people. And she just seems like the type where I actually feel for her, because she was probably an outcast. She was probably bullied in school. And so just like that, they were talking about on the Megyn Kelly show, she found this community where the weirder you are, the more attention you get. And like, that's the thing about this. It's appealing to the kids that never fit in anywhere else, and they just want to be liked. And like, here's this community that's going to sing your praises and be your friend. And I think that's why there's such a high percentage of autistic kids that are going through gender transition, because they've just had trouble fitting in. And so it's like this becomes their, safe haven for like all the outcasts. But the problem, obviously, is that it's not a safe haven. The price for admission is making changes that are permanent, that can lead to kidney and liver damage, lifelong medication that's expensive, and then a laundry list of other horrific side effects that you have to live with for the rest of your life. And again, like, it is child abuse, and it's preying on the most vulnerable people of our society. And as adults, that's where we all need to stand up and protect these kids that can't protect themselves.
Yeah, and you mentioned the high incidence of the transitioning in autistic kids. And I didn't look up any statistics on this, but I've heard that it's essentially especially high in the autistic community, which is
Chloe
even more
Cole is one
sad.
of them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which is just disturbing.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, this is a very like disturbing topic, but I want to bring up one other thing. So, for those of you who are in support of gender neutral bathrooms, here's a fun little story from the New York Post this week. So, there's new research on cleanliness of hospital restrooms showing that gender neutral toilets are the most contaminated. And women's bathrooms that are solely only for females contain fewer microbes than men's bathrooms. So, there's this researcher, Stephanie Dancer, and she's a consultant microbiologist at NHS Lanarkshire in the UK. And she, in this research, stated, quote, the move to convert traditional male and female facilities to unisex facilities in some hospitals raises concern that people are being exposed to higher risks of contamination, end quote. So their research found bacteria known to cause infections of the bloodstream, urinary tract, chest, respiratory, and other areas of the body in like a shit ton of E. coli. And the consensus was that women's restrooms tend to be more clean because women clean because they perceive like dirt to be disgusting and that it entices them to take action, whereas men either just don't notice a dirty environment or they don't care. And so they're saying that, women are likely to leave a bathroom clean while men assume someone's going to clean up after them. And I was laughing, but I'm in total agreement with this because, like, my husband will help out with a lot of stuff at home and he is like kick ass with the vacuum, but he doesn't like ever clean the bathroom. And if I didn't clean the bathroom, it would be fucking disgusting. And like, I've talked to my mom about this multiple times because her husband never cleans the bathroom. And she's done experiments where she will just like not clean his side of the bathroom for 6 months and see if he'll do anything about it. And he never does. Like, Stephanie, does your husband clean the bathroom? Because all I could think when I read this article was like, if gender neutral bathrooms in a hospital, which is a fairly sanitized environment where they go and they clean hourly, usually in these bathrooms, like what the fuck is it like in schools where kids are just disgusting? Having boys and girls share a bathroom in elementary school, middle school, high school, like no wonder these kids are fucking sick all the time.
Yeah. I am like so grossed out by this. And like, yeah, my husband, he is a very clean person. He does clean the house a lot, and I still get grossed out by the bathroom. So I can't imagine what these public restrooms look like. But I can't remember if I ever told this story before on the podcast, but I was with my daughter when she was, I want to say she was around 10 years old, and we went in the public bathroom at the mall. And I was in one stall, she was in the stall next to me. And all of a sudden, I hear this loud male voice coming from the other side of my daughter's stall. And like, I mean, it startled me, my blood ran cold. I'm like, oh my God. And it didn't even cross my mind that maybe this was a transgender person. I'm thinking like, there's a guy in the bathroom and he's going to do something to my daughter. So like, I literally stopped like mid pee, like run out of the stall. I'm ready to like call the cops and fight someone. And I mean, we can laugh about it now, but like when you're in that situation where there is a big, burly 6-foot man with a deep voice walking towards you in the bathroom, it's fucking scary.
Yeah.
And if I'm scared as an adult, I can't even imagine what would go through a kid's mind when they see that? And so, anyhow, like after that, I have been afraid to let my daughter go into public bathrooms alone because I feel like it just gives predators the perfect excuse to follow a girl into the bathroom, knowing that like if they get questioned, all they have to say is, "Oh, I'm trans." And like everyone's like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." And like let's just remember, we don't all have to just sit down and shut up and like take all this bullshit. As parents, as responsible adults, as decent human beings, I feel like we have a duty to speak up for what's right. And like, if you don't want to stand up for kids, then what will you stand for? Because again, they are the most vulnerable of our society. And so I feel like this is where everyone should draw the line. And I think an easy way to start with that is to simply share this episode. Like, bring awareness of this issue to your community or to someone who's pro the trans agenda, because they probably don't know. They probably don't realize what's happening behind the scenes. You know what I mean? Like, they have their head in the sand. And I want to thank everyone who's already out there, sharing the podcast and doing what they can do to speak up and make a difference. But we need everyone to do that. Like, we have to stand up for kids, because if we don't do this, then like I feel like we're just lost as a society.
Completely.
So that's my take on it, and I hope everyone does. But yeah, what a crazy time to be alive. And my gosh, if the California thing doesn't scare the shit out of you, then I don't know what will. So we'll keep everyone posted, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here on Monday. Have a great weekend. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.